Welcome to the Stories of School Leadership podcast, the podcast where we elevate the voices of and create connections between inspirational leaders from the UK and around the world. I'm Emma Lurie, and thank you for joining me as I share these journeys, inspirations, and stories of education, leadership, and life. In this episode, I'm joined by Yvonne Hogarth, who is an educational consultant, trainer, and coach. And we talk about Yvonne's journey into education, from teaching languages abroad, working in FE, through to departmental leadership and higher education. We explore the challenges of middle leaders, thinking about curriculum management or program management, and talk about that juggle and how difficult it is to do without a clear roadmap. We talk about the transferable skills that we can have when working in the education sector and what that can look like when we step outside. We talk about governance and how much upskilling is available if we want to step into this role. And we get into networking and how valuable this can be. So there's lots to dig into in this episode. I hope you really enjoy it. Hi, Yvonne. It's really great to have you with me. It's a sunny morning where I am. How are you? Tell us a bit about you and where you are joining us from.
Hi, Emma. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast. So I'm Yvonne Hogarth. I'm joining you from not so sunny Yorkshire. So I'm an educational consultant, a trainer and a coach, and I mainly work with further and higher education.
Amazing. Right, well, I need to find out how you got to that point then. That's what I always want to know. So tell us a little bit about, if you're happy to, your own kind of school experience and how that was for you.
Yeah, so I had a bit of a funny experience, I suppose, at school. I went to school in the 70s and 80s, so it's quite a long time ago now. And it was a totally different educational world, I think, back then. There was so much less regulation in schools, for good and for bad, really, I think. So I had at primary school, I had a really interesting, slightly mad, creative, nurturing primary school, where we did all sorts of crazy subjects like italics and sewing. And I'm sure they do some of those still now, but they were actually real subjects, that you spent the whole afternoon doing. And country dancing and things like that. And then I went to a fairly much more sort of a bit more straight-laced, I suppose, secondary school, which was more academic and I think probably put children in boxes more. So it was a bit weird going from one to the other. It wasn't really a seamless transition. And what I took from that, I think, it's really informed my values about education, which are around, I really, I kind of took the value of the high aspiration for children. And when I've gone into teaching roles, I've always held that really high, that, the support you can give to young people to develop, to have high aspirations, but also the real importance of nurturing that whole child, and the value of those creative subjects that I've also returned to, like in my later life, as hobbies and more than, so yeah.
It's interesting having, like you said, having those two stark different.
Yes.
But people often don't look back and think about how maybe their schooling led them down that journey, but often we do, come back to some of those, and they do create either those values in us or some of the beliefs that we think about. Either we want it to be really different to what we experience,
Yeah.
or that really worked for me and we want to create that for others. So how did you get into education as a career then? What was that step like?
So I think I never intended to get into education. I just certainly didn't, think, oh, I always want to be a teacher or anything like that. But I went to university and studied English, and then didn't really know what I wanted to do. But while I was at university, I did an exchange. I did an Erasmus exchange to Italy. So I went over there for 3 months. And the one thing I knew I wanted to do was to go back to Italy. So that was like the sort of aim. And so the only way to, well, the sort of most obvious way to do that was to teach. So I thought, right, well, I'll sign up for a TEFL course, which I did over a year. And that was amazing, because almost really as soon as I started that course, I realized that I just loved teaching. And it was a great course. They often get pretty bad rap, I think, TEFL courses, as being not very serious and stuff. But well, for me, it wasn't like that. It was such a foundation in teaching, and it gave me so many skills that then I took into other sorts of teaching that I've done in my life. It was the absolute basis, really, I think, for my whole kind of pedagogy, I think, as well. So it was amazing, actually. And then I went abroad and taught for 3 years. So yeah, it was by completely a lucky accident.
Loads of people say that, don't they? Like fell into it, or it found them. They didn't find it. Where did you go in Italy?
So I taught in a town called Ferrara, which is in the northeast. I was there for 3 years. Yeah, it was a fantastic experience. Oh my God, I just so recommend it to anybody who's thinking of going abroad, or yeah, or just encouraging their students to do that. I absolutely I'm just, yeah, really passionate about that and the value of modern foreign languages, and what we've lost, I think, in education through that. I mentioned about creative subjects earlier being deprioritized, but MFL is another one that has just gone by the wayside. And yeah, that it's so important as a subject. It opens, a language opens up doors for you, and it opens up you to another culture, that you can't access unless you speak the language, or you can only access in a partial way. So yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and I know we sort of mentioned, or we briefly started talking about sort of language is before we came on, because we're a host family for
Yeah, you
coming
said,
frequent to learn
yeah,
English. But yeah, I think in those conversations that I've had with the students that come and stay with us, they just so much cultural learning that
yeah,
comes from having those connections. And I mean, we always say to the students come and stay with us, the Brits are not great at languages, it's not prioritized in our culture enough, it certainly isn't.
yeah.
But for them, their English is just incredible. And we always say I would love to be able to speak another language as well as they can. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that whole experience of staying like in a host family, oh gosh, it's such having, like, if you've ever gone to stay abroad with people who live in that country,
Yeah.
it's just a totally different experience, isn't it, to going on holiday somewhere?
Yeah, it's just fascinating the things you just find out, about how different things work. And I mean, I'm
Yeah.
always fascinated finding about the education system. So I'm grilling them over dinner, like, how does this work? When do you go to school and all of those things? But yeah, we talk about so many interesting things. But anyway, well, I'll get off track. But you didn't stay in Italy because now you're in York. So
No.
what next?
Yeah, I came back and then so taught in sort of York, in and around York for a few years after that, teaching um still doing teaching English as a foreign language, but I did all sorts of stuff then, like yeah, I sort of branched out a bit. I suppose I worked for myself really at that point as well. I was doing freelance work, a bit of moderation. I did a bit of modern foreign languages. I taught Italian at one point as well. So yeah, I went off into all sorts of different directions really, around education. And then I think just realized, thought, well, I wanted a bit more stability, I think. And that world at that time, the sort of EFL world, was quite, there wasn't a massive career sort of sort of journey that you could do. It wasn't very well regarded. There was also, that there wasn't a sort of scope, I don't think, for moving on, I suppose, or developing. So I thought, well, I'll retrain and do a PGCE and go back into secondary teaching. So that was a bit of a that was a bit of yeah, an eye-opener, I think. Quite different, actually. Even though I could teach, I hadn't any experience of behavior management, which was the biggest thing, I think, when I started teaching in secondary. It was just, oh, what's going on here? With children jumping out of seats and things. I wasn't used to any of that. So that I really realized soon, I thought, gosh, I really got to nail these skills in order to be able to teach. Because I thought, well, like, I can't do any teaching because I'm just managing diverse needs of children.
Yeah.
So I think I got pretty good at that in the end, actually. And I did supply for a while, and that was obviously, it really tests those skills, doesn't it? Because you've got to get that just a good working environment before you can do anything on supply. And you've got you've got to build the trust, and oh gosh,
But
that
very
is
quickly, in like 10 minutes
yeah.
before you walk in and go, hi, I'm with you today. And they're like, right, we're going to test this one.
I really take my hat off to supply teachers because they are an amazing bunch of people to do that role. It's really challenging. I mean, it has its real benefits, I think, and you learn so much, but wow, yeah, that takes some doing, I think. So yeah, I did that for a while, and then um realized that actually the bit I'd liked most in secondary was the sixth form.
Mm.
So I thought, well, I think I'd like to work in that area. So yeah, then I got a job in a further education college in doing teaching sixth form. So that was the next step.
So like real nice but diverse mix of, I guess, roles. And then yeah, what happened next? I know you've done some work kind of in universities and others. So was that a
Yeah,
stepping stone
it
into that
was. Yeah, it
further
was.
education?
So I taught in a further education college, and I taught English, and then also yeah, that was my first leadership experience as well. I got promoted into head of department role. Um, that was really challenging. It was really challenging as a first role, I think, in leadership. Actually, interestingly, I guess you get better, don't you, at leadership, because the first roles are always kind of more difficult. But equally, I think possibly that was the most challenging role I've done. But I learned so much from that role. And then so I did that. I sort of led a department in further education. And from that sort of, it was a springboard into then managing the higher education provision in the college, which was quite niche provision. And yeah, and not very, when I took it on, it was like nobody really was interested in it because it didn't bring any money in particularly. It was just a bit of a flagship thing for the college to do a bit of higher education because it set a kind of tone, about aspiration. And so yeah, I sort of got given this responsibility for a few hours a week, and then it just kind of mushroomed because the whole landscape for education, higher education changed and became more the opening up basically of higher education providers, the encouragement for further education providers to go into delivering HE. So so my role then suddenly was like it just mushroomed and became quite important for the college and became a big income stream. But it was an interesting challenge, that one, because that was a real case of small provision within a big institution doing a load of different sorts of delivery for learners, for anything from, gosh, like online stuff to in the community, to learners coming back to study like entry-level qualifications, to our highest was master's qualifications. So but having like really sort of like having a voice in that was really challenging, because there was always some other priority. And I was always there going, yes, but higher education, like trying to raise the profile of higher education. That was a learning experience as well, how you do that. And you through influence and speaking people's language, I think.
And when I'm interested in the logistics, I guess, of that. So when you were in that sort of role, were you doing any teaching as well? Or could you kind
Oh
of step into
gosh,
more of the
yes. Yes. No, all of them were like
juggling it
Effie.
all?
Effie is really interesting. I absolutely love my time in further education. Again, it's a kind of misunderstood sector, but what you get in education is people do lots of roles. They have lots of hats, especially in small FE, because you might and you might be the only subject specialist in your whole institution, doing a whole load of different roles. But for me, like English was quite a big department because we had learners on GCSE, functional skills, 3 different A levels. Yeah, so I was doing, at one point I was doing teaching A level, and that might be language lit and the combined one. And then I was teaching on the initial teacher ed program. I was maybe doing some mentoring or coaching as well. I was heading up English department. And then at one point I also got these hours to manage HE, from like on about, I don't know, 30 hours a year or something ridiculous like that. So, but what it gave, I think the best thing about that experience, and for other people as well at the college, is there were real opportunities. Like you could take on a responsibility and gain that experience. Yeah, so in that sense it was a fantastic learning place. Yeah.
That is really interesting, and you're right. I mean, I am primary experience mainly, and so it does feel really alien. I wouldn't know how that fits together and how it all works, but yeah, sounds really, really fascinating.
Yeah, and it also so much juggling, I think, in those sorts of roles. You've
Yeah.
got to keep your eye on the ball of all sorts of, to of all those different responsibilities, I suppose.
And I think
Yeah.
educators, anyone teach, teaching assistants right the way up to, you know, CEOs, that is part of working in education, because we are expected to juggle so many different elements. We're looking, you know, from one moment looking at safeguarding, then you're thinking about curriculum, then
Yeah,
you're, you know, supporting a family, then you're thinking about, yeah, I don't know, school improvement or improvement planning. So many different elements, aren't there, to be
there
thinking
are.
about. But
And yeah,
I guess maybe sometimes that's the joy of it, in the sense that it isn't just one thing, and a lot of people like to have lots of things going on,
yeah,
don't
it is.
they?
It's the keeping you on your toes, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think absolutely. And it brings out different you know, different sort of strengths and talents, doesn't it, in you? And so it tests you in different ways. I think some
mm,
of those, because some of it is more process oriented, isn't it? And you might
yeah,
be brilliant at that. And some of it is more people oriented. So it's, you know, and that's really interesting thing about teaching, isn't it? And education is it attracts all sorts, like there isn't one kind of way to be a teacher, and you just bring your own personality to it.
yeah,
I remember somebody saying that to me when I started in the FE college, and I'd come from this sort of secondary training, and it was a bit, you know, it's the progression at FE from the rigid school system to, you know, launching children, like young people into university and the freedom. And so we were in that kind of middle bracket, and they said, oh, you'll sort of find your way with how you manage that. I mean, we were like first name terms and things with the students, and it was more open door. It was quite informal.
yeah,
um and yeah, it just took a while to move out of that, you know, right, everybody take your coats off, line up at the door,
yeah,
into just being your own personality, I think, really. But I loved it. The students were great, and I still do love working with that age group of transitioning age group, anything really between, you know, I don't know, 16 to 20 something, because young people go through such change, I think, at that time, you know, and they're developing, and it's amazing to be part of that development, you know.
yeah. Oh, I love it. It's so fantastic to hear about how it all works, and it intrigues me. I've always been kind of, you know, really interested in getting into. Like, I remember my sort of PGCE tutors and just thinking, God, they're so inspirational and amazing. In fact, one of them is, I'm doing a Women Ed event soon in the Southwest, and she's coming to speak, and she was one of my tutors. So
Oh wow.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing
It's
her. I
funny
don't know if
that,
she'll remember me,
yes,
but
when you,
I just, yeah, she was amazing. And I always thought, I'd love to, that sort of teaching, I'd love to get into that, you know, now I've
yeah, yeah.
slightly more confident about
Oh,
maybe working with
absolutely do
adults.
it.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Wholly,
um,
it's completely different teaching adults to teaching young people. I'd only say that. I mean, it's the same principle, but my golly, it's just so different, actually, the challenges. And yeah, I've always loved teaching. I started off teaching adults, actually, and then went back to teaching young people, and then have moved between the two since, really. And yeah, I love both, actually, but it's so different, actually.
yeah. When you were talking about your, I guess, stepping into that leadership role, and the first one was very challenging, um, I'm just interested to know, I guess, who or what has inspired you along the way. So, like you said, sometimes you're a bit all by yourself, and there's no one else who has maybe got that specialism in that element. What did you kind of draw upon, either for leadership or just for, yeah, how you take those next steps? Really, was there reading or people or train? Because we don't always get training, do we, as leaders? Kind
No.
of, like you said, you're expected to go, oh, you'll find your way, figure it
Yes.
out. Like, what helped you along the way?
Oh, yeah, I think that first role, I had absolutely no training. I was so unprepared for it, and I just drew on um I don't know, I'd call it common sense or something, really, about what it was about, moving a department from a very low place in terms of like its Ofsted, you know, sort of its reputation, and its and how Ofsted were viewing it, and how the college were viewing it. A department been sort of neglected and left to sort of just flounder a bit. So I guess it was just understanding what the issues were, and because I'd worked in it. Actually, I really knew those issues because I came in on a sort of supply contract for a year, and had sort of really, you know, experienced that all the issues that you know, all the sort of problems, if you like. So I suppose that put me in a good place. I guess that's one of the things, isn't it? You have to have lived it,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
And it meant I could then identify really quickly and so I knew what needed to change. But it's just how you get there is challenging, isn't it? And I think I'd say, in a way, the mistake I made, although it wasn't, you just learn, don't you, was that I was very process oriented, I think, in that first leadership role. And because that's kind of what needed to happen. The process needed to be in place, because that's the world we live in, isn't it? For regulatory kind of compliance. And the timetabling and the schemes of work and all of that sort of thing. And I did all that. And that was kind of, I felt really comfortable doing that. And then the staff relations, that took a lot longer. And I think if I was doing it again, I would be thinking this has to, the staff bit has to come first, because it's just how to gauge that when you're a new leader is really, you just find your way, don't you?
Yeah, and I think that common sense is something about your gut, isn't it? It's knowing what feels right and what works. And I remember once I started, I mean, when in my first headships, I had absolutely no brain space to do any educational reading or other. And I would sort of roll my eyes a bit when someone told me to read something. I think, when on earth am I going to do any of
I've
that?
had that before.
And and then when I
decided
in my wisdom to leap into a master's and got into some of that reading, it gave me a bit of more confidence. So I found that there was sort of research behind some of the things that were, you're right, it was just a bit of common sense, a bit of a gut. I was just giving it a go. And I later found things that I thought, oh, that's, it was why that I was doing it. And made, I don't know, around like building psychological safety or a range of other different ideas that I had no idea that I was doing that. But some of the processes or systems that I was trying to put in place were kind of trying to build those things. So I did find that the reading was helpful. I just didn't really have the capacity to do it when I probably needed it most. I've done it retrospectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's valuable at any time, isn't it? Because you just learn, like it's just a different level of reflection if you practice and then do the reading, and then you reflect. And that's something that a master's really forces you to do, isn't it? You have to reflect on it.
Try to. I don't know if it was a good idea, but anyway. So tell me, what happened next, and how did you get into the work? Tell us a bit more about the kind of the work that you're doing now as well.
Yeah, I guess that's it. There's a good link there in a way, because, and just what you were saying there around you sort of learn by doing, don't you, sometimes in these early leadership roles. And so what I do now is it's a mix of consultancy and training and coaching, but I'm really interested in working with that group of people, really, I think, who are either early leaders or particularly like program or curriculum leaders. And so it's people who are juggling this sort of leadership with teaching roles, basically, because it is such a juggle. And often you come at that with a whole set of skills that can, like, are great for certain areas of the work, but then you've got loads of gaps. And like you said, unless you do some training, you've got no way of knowing what those gaps are, how to fill them, what some structures and frameworks to support you, and some reading and all of that. So that's kind of that's the space that I'm interested in supporting people in, because I think I struggled a lot, actually, and just learned by doing. And actually I think there must be a better way for educators, like we must be able to support people better, actually, so that you can go into roles prepared and and not have to just manage.
You're right. And so tell us a bit more about sort of the logistical things that you do at the moment and how that works.
Yeah, so I do some consultancy work. I work on going back to the MFL discussion. I do work supporting international mobilities. So work as a grant assessor for a couple of schemes, national schemes on that. So I do a range of sort of consultancy that, and I do some training as well with so I suppose supporting career development and things like that for learners. And then I also do my own training programs. I run training programs for organizations, so working mainly with universities and further education. That's something I'm looking to develop, and particularly in offering coaching, offering professional development, offering leadership training. And as we said, for that kind of role that is a program leader type role. And then I do also do some coaching as well, one-to-one coaching. And that's, it could be for a range of people, but loosely connected to education.
Well, I mean, that is needed so much at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, just thinking about the different, I guess, the different roles that you've done, and you've spanned a range of different, all teaching and education and leadership, but kind of got that diversity of different job roles. And that's so interesting, isn't it? I think I've spoken to lots of people recently who we can pigeonhole ourselves sometimes in education to feel that we've got to follow this one path and stay in one element of education. And then actually which is why I'm so passionate about having these conversations and sharing,
Yeah.
speak to so many people who have stepped sideways maybe into different, and they found a real passion has ignited in different areas. So, like you said, bit of time in Italy and then some time in college, and then stepping into sort of the higher education. It's interesting, isn't it, to see that it doesn't all have to be so linear, and there's lots of different opportunities.
No, I've been really lucky, I think. I think it's probably partly the nature of the sort of choices that I made that allowed those opportunities. Like, for example, that EFL world is quite broad. You get loads of scope to do things. Further education is quite broad. You get loads of scope to do things. So, and then ended up like most latterly in higher education, which was so interesting in itself as well. A totally different culture, really, to other educational sectors I've worked in. But again, working in a really big university allowed me then to do all sorts of different project management roles, curriculum development roles, resources, all of these things. So it's sort of like a bit opportunity. It's being in the right sort of place, isn't it, to have those opportunities, but also openness, I think, to I've never been afraid to do stuff. Like somebody said, do you want to do this? And I thought, oh, that sounds exciting. I've no idea if I've got the skills for it. I might be rubbish at it, but I'll give it a go.
Yeah. And it's just knowing, isn't it? I think knowing what's out there is another element that sometimes when we're in our roles, if we're in schools, if we're working full time in schools, again, I speak to people who are maybe thinking about exploring other options. They
Yeah.
just don't know what's out there. They don't know, like I was saying about sort of the working in maybe
Yeah.
supporting PGCE students. We don't always have this knowledge. So
No, that's
idea of
true.
how do we find that knowledge about
Yeah,
the
that
things
is
that are
so.
available?
I hadn't thought about it like that. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think for me, it was working in further education because FE colleges just do so much. Like they do everything from, like I said, like entry level in the community, supporting adults, with sort of life skills and so on, to, the adult learning stuff that everybody knows about. We've done a college course or something, to, your vocational training for learners, to apprenticeships. And so actually in that sort of space you get to sit, you're like, oh well, I could do this or I could do that, and you can see how transferable your skills are. Actually, it's all about, they're great places for advocating for transferability of skills, because actually they're practicing what they preach through their, the opportunities they give their staff, I think.
Yeah.
So that for me, I think is the place that opened up my eyes to possibilities. But yeah, there's so much scope out there. And that's something I'm really passionate about, is how much we can learn from each other across sectors, and how, joined up we can be. Yeah, so I think that's, that's just another area, actually, that there's a whole potential there that we're not exploiting at the moment, for people to work with each other collaboratively, across different parts of education. And one way that I'm doing that, and that we talked about earlier, didn't we, is in governance. It's a fantastic place to, in governance you get people from across the educational sector, but you get also people from other professions, and that's really interesting too, because you can get quite in a bubble in education. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I think, gosh, a lot of my friends work in education, and how many people do I know who don't work in education? And so like, and it's very narrow, because then once you interact with people outside of that, it's just a whole different world.
You're right. It does feel like you're right. I mean, yeah, all of my friends are in education, and if we meet up, the husbands are like, "Oh gosh, they're talking about teaching again." But you're right. There is so much that can feel quite alien externally, I think. And when you look into, I mean, and we have conversations around, oh, that you wouldn't get this in corporate, you wouldn't get this in business,
Yeah.
and you do that comparison, but we might not always realistically understand how it works in another sector. But I think you're right. You're tapping into that value, and it's where and how can we access that. I remember reading a book called Rebel Ideas, and it gives lots of examples around how the value of working together with different people from different sectors, and exactly that in
Yeah,
governance. You know, I
fantastic.
know
Yeah.
working as a head with governors, and people would come in from all sorts of different job roles, and the perspective that they can give,
Yes.
they're just ideas you didn't have, because you're right, you go through this sort of narrow route of education and think, oh, it's always been done this way.
Yeah.
If we're open enough to those ideas, then yeah, the world opens up a little bit. I suppose
I,
it's where and how can we get that going? What could be a space where people can access that networking, because that would be so
yes.
valuable.
Absolutely. Well, governance is a space, I think, it's already there for accessing that. And if you like people interested in developing themselves actually through and governance gives you a strategic view as well. It gives you so many opportunities. Like if you were interested in developing your career, like an early point in your career in education, it's just I couldn't recommend it enough. It is a massive learning curve. I mean, because of some of the challenges that governors have to deal with, it's sometimes really difficult things like complaints and restructuring and all of those sorts of things. But if you're looking to gain experience, a higher level experience, and you haven't got the opportunity to do that in your role, then that is a massive opportunity really that it presents. And also looking at things from a strategic lens, because again, I think that's something that I learned as I sort of moved up through leadership roles. And when I worked in a more operational role, I wasn't really operating very strategically. And as soon as I started to be strategic in a role, I sort of some kind of light bulb happened, and I thought, "Gosh, why haven't I always done this?" And then you can't unlearn it.
Yeah. And I guess that, yeah, that opportunity to, if you are, yeah, able to get on a governing body of a school, whether that or school or, organization, even if whether it's similar or very different to the one you work in, it just gives you that opportunity to see things from the other side, doesn't it? Because when we're in our
Yeah.
own organizations, you're just so caught up in how things are, how they work. It can feel quite blinkered because you just got to keep going, haven't you, on like a
Yes.
little treadmill. And having the opportunity to see another organization, how they do things or don't do things,
Yes.
just broadens your mind a bit. I mean, I would be fascinated to probably look at governance in a secondary or FE or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Completely different. Yeah.
different. I trust I most recently worked for had secondary schools as part of it. Before, I'd always worked with primary schools, and just even having access to those head teachers when we met together was it so fascinating. Just, I had no idea
Yeah.
that how timetabling worked. Primary school, you just map out a timetable for the hall and everyone figures out what they're teaching in their class. It's fine. Secondary, oh my gosh, it's like one whole
Oh
person's
my
or
God, I
five
can
people's job,
imagine.
isn't it, to timetable
Yes.
how things work. So yeah, seeing things from a different perspective is really important.
Yeah, I think I feel really lucky in my career that I've had the opportunity to work in so many different organizations, different roles. And yeah, it sort of makes you feel a little bit like you're sort of jack of all trades and master of none at times.
I think that's what we
But
are in education, isn't it?
yeah, maybe. But I'm really, oh gosh, I'm so passionate about bringing people together actually in this area about across education, because so many times actually I've landed in a job and we've sort of tried to implement something, a change process or something, and people have said, oh, we can't do it like that because we always do it like this, and this is the only way it works. And I'm like thinking, actually, no, I know that isn't true because I worked in such a place and they did it like this, and actually it worked fine. So the more you understand how it works across different, sectors and have some insight into that, I think the more tools you have at your disposal actually, and the more, it's just so you can learn so much from each other as well. There isn't so much that divides us actually. Teaching is teaching is teaching, and educational leadership is educational leadership, and the context is different, of course, but some of the principles are absolutely the same. And yeah, I'd be really interested actually in anybody who out there who is interested in this area, who wants to learn from other people working other sectors, and who's interested in developing a network around this, because that's something I've got a nugget of an idea about wanting to do that. But it'd be great to link up with anybody who shares that passion.
Absolutely. I think you're on to something there. Yeah. Anybody out there, get in touch. Where's the best
Yes.
place to contact you? LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn's good. I'm on LinkedIn,
Right.
and also my website has got all my content and things on. So yeah.
Well, we'll share links, and obviously when it goes out, it will have the link to your LinkedIn. So I think you're on something there, and it might be that things exist that are out there I don't know about them, and I can as you're talking, I can sort of imagine I don't know, like a working lunch where people could just come together from different share ideas and just opportunity. I mean, people are so, I have found anyway, people in education are so open and willing to give of their time and their energy. And it's all, I can almost see times when as a head I just thought, oh, I need to go and be around other people who are in different sectors, different organizations, and go, oh, this is a problem I've got. And I can imagine the wealth of ideas and knowledge that might come from that would be very different than if you go to an opportunity where you've got other people working exactly the same, because we see
I think seeing other cultures as well. I think that's a really big part, isn't it, of your like a head role is what organizational culture you engender, especially if it's a small school, because you've got so much, in a way, like influence over that, actually, which is obviously probably quite a scary thing, but also a really amazing thing. And I think seeing how other educational cultures operate is really fascinating, and how they can, like, how you can steer that into, if it's a culture is not, being very productive, it's how you can move it into something that's far more open and so on. So yeah, that's fascinating, I think, as well.
Right. Well, I mean, sign me up. I'm coming along to these. Whatever this
okay, we have a network.
We've something started right here, right now. We've got a network of 2. Who wants to join in?
Yes, anybody welcome. Anybody welcome.
Amazing. Well, it's been so fantastic to chat to you.
Yeah, you
so
too.
Much for spending time, sharing your journey and your ideas. I definitely think we've got something going. We're going to start a little spark has begun here today.
Oh, thank you. It's great. I have to have the opportunity to reflect. Actually, we don't do it enough, do we? We so do not reflect enough on, our journeys, I suppose.
Thank you so much for listening to the Stories of School Leadership podcast. We'd love to know what inspired you in this episode, so do get in touch and tell us your thoughts. And please share this with friends and colleagues. If you have time, a review would mean so much. It really helps us to reach more people. If you'd like to connect with me to follow my journey or access some support, maybe supervision, coaching or early years consultancy, you can find me at Stories of School Leadership on Instagram. I'm Emma Lurie on LinkedIn, or my website is emmalurie.co.uk. I hope you have a great day whatever you're getting up to next, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.